My girlfriend returned from her suspicious workshop trip only to discover I had packed everything and left a devastating goodbye note explaining why I was gone forever. Hey everyone, my name is Tyler, and I'm 29 years old. For the longest time, I thought I was living what everyone calls the perfect life. I had been with my wife Vanessa for 7 years, and from the outside, everything looked like it was going exactly as it should. But looking back now, I realized that Vanessa always had this way of making an entrance wherever she went, like she was directing a show and starring herself as the main character in every scene. That Tuesday afternoon started like any other day, but it ended up being the moment everything changed. I heard the front door creak open around mid-afternoon, and she stepped inside with her designer suitcase trailing behind her. She was swinging her handbag over one shoulder with that practiced motion that made her look like she had just walked out of some glossy magazine advertisement. She was still wearing that black jacket she had posted on her Instagram story that morning, the same one from her supposed business conference. What struck me immediately was how perfect everything about her appearance was. Her curls were styled too perfectly, her eyeliner was too intact for someone who had supposedly just spent 4 days sitting in conference rooms and networking events. She looked like she had just stepped out of a photo shoot rather than returning from a grueling work trip. Something about it felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was at the time. She took exactly 3 steps inside our house before her heel suddenly slid across the smooth hardwood floor. The reason was simple. The rug that usually sat in our entryway was missing. She froze completely in that moment, standing there with a confused expression on her face as she tried to process what she was seeing. I watched this entire scene unfold through our hallway security camera feed. I was sitting there with the sound turned off, holding a cup of tea in my hands, observing from 3 towns away. It was like watching a cold, high-definition loop of someone walking into a house that didn't belong to her anymore. And the reason it didn't belong to her was simple. I had taken it back. Let me back up and explain how I got to that point. The night before her return, I had finished packing everything by 3:15 a.m. It was one of those methodical, almost robotic processes where you move through your own life like you're dismantling someone else's belongings. I made sure to leave the lights on in every single room except our bedroom. I wanted the house to feel occupied but hollow when she walked in. I went through each room systematically, emptying drawers and collecting everything that belonged to me. I took both of our dogs, Max and Luna, because they had always been more mine than ours anyway. I grabbed my passport, all of my charger cables, my mother's old photo album that Vanessa had always complained took up too much space on the bookshelf, and the $180 in emergency cash that I kept hidden behind some books. It was money that Vanessa never even knew existed, tucked away behind volumes she never bothered to dust. Before I left, I did something that felt both dramatic and necessary at the time. I took our marriage license and burned it completely. I kept copies of the official documents, of course, but I burned the ceremonial one we had framed. I collected all the ashes and put them in a mason jar, which I placed on the windowsill with a yellow sticky note attached. The note simply read, "For your next performance." The strangest part about that entire night was how calm I felt throughout the whole process. I didn't rage, I didn't cry, I didn't throw things or punch walls like you might expect someone to do when their world is falling apart. I just methodically and quietly exited from a life that had stopped feeling like mine a long time ago. This whole situation had been building for months, though I didn't fully realize it at the time. It was like watching something slowly unravel in front of you, but convincing yourself that the loose threads were just temporary problems that would somehow fix themselves. Our dinners together had gradually transformed from conversations into what felt like silent transactions. We would sit across from each other at the table, going through the motions of eating together, but there was no real connection happening anymore. She started developing this habit of giggling at text messages while I sat right next to her on the couch. I would be scrolling through our dead Hulu queue, pretending to look for something to watch, while trying not to notice how she would deliberately shift her phone screen away from me whenever I glanced in her direction. Her phone's lock code seemed to change every other week, and whenever I asked about it casually, she would give me some excuse about security or work requirements. She began forgetting our anniversaries, missing 3 family events in a row, and had started blaming everything on burnout from her freelance clients. According to her, she was constantly overwhelmed with work, constantly stressed about deadlines, constantly needed space to focus on her creative projects. But looking back now, I realized that all of these excuses were just a carefully constructed cover story for something much bigger that was happening behind the scenes. But what finally broke everything wide open wasn't any of these slow, gradual changes. It was a single voice that I heard during a phone call 4 nights before I packed everything up and left. I called Vanessa around 11:30 p.m. that night, just to check in like I normally did when she was away on business trips. She picked up the phone unusually quickly, too quickly actually. There was something about the speed of her response that immediately felt off to me, like she had been waiting for the call or expecting it. "Hey, babe," she said, and I could hear that she was slightly breathless. There was this fake static quality in her voice, like she was deliberately trying to make it sound like she was walking down a hotel hallway or moving around her room. It was the kind of performance that might have fooled me months earlier, but by that point, I had started paying attention to these little details. I asked her where she was, keeping my tone casual and conversational. "In my room, obviously," she replied. "The workshop went late tonight, so I'm just winding down now." It was the kind of answer that sounded reasonable on the surface, but something about the way she said it felt rehearsed, like she had been practicing that exact response. Then I heard it, the thing that made my blood run cold and confirmed what part of me had been suspecting for weeks. In the background, barely audible but definitely there, I heard a man's voice. It was close, too close to be coming from a hallway or another room. The voice said, "Yovan, grab that other blanket. The window's freezing in here." The casual intimacy of that moment, the nickname Van, the comfortable way he spoke to her, the implication that they were sharing a space where blankets and windows mattered, hit me like a physical blow. But what made it even worse was how Vanessa handled it. She didn't immediately mute the call. She didn't hang up in a panic. She didn't even try to cover the phone or move away from the source of the voice. Instead, she just calmly said, "That's the front desk guy, don't worry about it." Her tone was so matter-of-fact, so dismissive, like she was tired of having to explain away these little inconsistencies in her stories. It was the voice of someone who had gotten sloppy because she thought I was too trusting or too naive to piece things together. It was like she was done trying to maintain the illusion and was just going through the motions out of habit. I made a decision in that moment that probably saved my sanity. I played dumb. I didn't confront her. I didn't demand explanations. I didn't start an argument that would have just given her more opportunities to lie. Instead, I simply said, "Good night," in the same casual tone I always used, and then I hung up the phone. But as soon as that call ended, I started downloading everything I could get my hands on. I pulled up our bank statements, location data from her phone, and the last 14 months of phone logs from our shared account. I sat there in the dark, feeling this hollow sensation in my stomach and a tightness in my jaw that I couldn't shake as I began to systematically uncover the anatomy of her double life. Piece by piece, detail by detail, I discovered a pattern that had been hiding in plain sight. There were 15 different hotels across 6 different cities, all during times when she had told me she was attending workshops, conferences, or meeting with clients. And through all of this data, one name kept appearing over and over again: Blake Morrison. A quick social media search revealed that Blake was a freelance photographer who had apparently met Vanessa during some kind of branding shoot. He had tattoos covering one arm, a carefully groomed beard, and the kind of rugged jawline that probably photographed well for his professional work. He had posted a selfie that made my heart sink. It showed him in hotel room lighting with a blurred brunette woman whose face wasn't visible, but whose hand was clearly resting on his chest. The caption read, "When work feels like play." Work feels. I stared at that photo for hours, unable to look away. I couldn't see her face clearly in the image, but I knew the exact shape and size of that hand resting on his chest. It was a hand I had kissed 1,000 times, a hand that wore the wedding ring I had put on it 7 years earlier. The casual intimacy of the pose, the comfortable way her fingers spread across his skin, told me everything I needed to know about how long this had been going on and how deep it had gotten. What struck me most about Vanessa's deception was how she hadn't even tried to hide Blake completely. Instead, she had camouflaged him within her professional life, turning him into just another creative contact, another collaboration opportunity, another name in her business inbox. She had transformed their affair into something that looked legitimate on the surface, just 2 professionals working together on various projects. But when I dug deeper into the evidence, her heart was loud in those photos, and her lies screamed from the shadows of every carefully crafted story. The timestamps on hotel receipts lined up perfectly with her supposed business trips. The location data from her phone told a completely different story than the conference schedules she had shared with me. Every piece of the puzzle fit together with devastating clarity. So I made my move, but not in the way most people would expect. I didn't confront her. I didn't stage some dramatic showdown. I didn't plan to catch them together. Instead, I systematically began dismantling our shared life while she was still away playing house with Blake in whatever city they were visiting that week. First, I canceled the gym membership we shared, the one where we used to work out together back when she still pretended to care about doing things as a couple. I forwarded all of her PR invoices and business correspondence to her personal email address, effectively cutting her off from the joint business accounts we had set up when she started freelancing. I locked her out of our joint Google Drive, where we stored everything from tax documents to vacation photos. I transferred all of my important passwords to a new system that she couldn't access, and I booked a 3-month lease at a small cabin by the lake, about an hour outside the city, where no one knew my name or our history together. It was the kind of place where I could disappear completely and figure out what came next without having to perform normalcy for neighbors and friends who still thought we were the perfect couple. The last thing I did before walking out of our house for the final time was deeply petty, but it felt necessary in the moment. I opened every single curtain in the house so that when she returned, the place would be flooded with natural light, no shadows for her to hide in anymore. Then I unplugged her electric toothbrush, that expensive one she had insisted we needed because it was better for her Instagram-worthy smile. I left her phone charger wrapped in a note that contained the words she hated hearing most from me. The words that cut through all of her performances and justifications. You left me long before I left you. It was the truth she had been running from for months, and I wanted it to be the first thing she saw when she tried to plug in her phone to call Blake or whoever else was helping her maintain her double life. Now, as I watched her through that security camera feed, standing there in the foyer like someone who had just realized the credits were rolling, and her name wasn't anywhere on the screen, I could predict exactly what would happen next. I knew her patterns, her go-to moves when things didn't go according to her script. She would call me within the hour and she would cry. She would say it was all a mistake, that she was scared and lonely and confused about what she really wanted. Maybe she would even bring up couples therapy again. That was always her favorite card to play when she needed to buy time or make me feel like I was the one giving up too easily. That was her specialty. Talking her way out of consequences and somehow making you feel like you were the one who hadn't tried hard enough to make things work. But not this time. This time I was already gone, both physically and emotionally. And she was left standing in a house full of echoes, with her luggage still packed full of souvenirs from a trip she would never be able to explain honestly. This was how the real story began. Not with betrayal, not even with heartbreak, but with silence. And the most important thing I had learned about silence was that it doesn't lie. Vanessa called exactly 19 minutes after she walked into the house. No surprise there. That's exactly how she always handled things, whenever the center of her carefully constructed world stopped spinning the way she expected it to. Her immediate instinct was always to grab the wheel and twist it until everything obeyed her will again. The phone buzzed 7 times before I finally decided to answer it. I held it away from my ear slightly, like the sound of her voice might actually sting if I let it get too close. When I finally accepted the call, her voice came through quiet at first, almost uncertain. "Tyler," she said, like she wasn't entirely sure it was actually me on the other end of the line. "Yeah, what the hell is going on?" I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Notice what she didn't say. She didn't ask, "Where are you?" or "Are you okay?" The questions that a genuinely concerned spouse might ask when they come home to find their partner and all of their belongings mysteriously vanished. Instead, she went straight to, "What the hell is going on?" Like this was some kind of inconvenience I had created specifically to disrupt her day. That was Vanessa in a nutshell, always more concerned about the disruption to her plans than the underlying reasons for the disruption. I didn't answer her question right away. I wanted to let her stew in the uncertainty for a moment, to give her time to walk through those empty rooms and really process what she was seeing. I pictured her moving from room to room, gradually realizing that the bathroom drawer didn't contain my razor anymore, that my favorite tea mug with the small chip on the handle was gone from the kitchen cabinet, and that Max and Luna weren't asleep on the couch like they always were when she came home from her supposed business trips. Then she said it, the first lie in what I knew would be a long series of lies and deflections. "I came back from the workshop and all your stuff is gone," she said, her voice taking on that performative confusion that she did so well. "Your luggage is gone. Are you trying to scare me? What is this?" Scare her? The sheer delusion in her voice almost made me laugh out loud. Here was a woman who had been living a double life for months, lying to my face every single day, sneaking around with another man in hotel rooms across multiple cities. And she was asking me if I was trying to scare her by finally removing myself from a situation that had become completely toxic. "I know about Blake," I said simply, letting those 4 words hang in the air between us. The silence that followed was long enough for me to hear her exhale sharply through her nose. I could practically feel her brain scrambling to figure out exactly how much I knew and what her best strategy would be for handling this new development. Then came a little scoff, that dismissive sound she always made when she was about to try to gaslight me. "Oh my God, you're being crazy right now," she said. That word, crazy, was exactly what I had expected her to say. It's the word that people like Vanessa always use when they're trying to erase the truth because it doesn't suit their narrative. They take your completely rational response to their dishonest behavior and try to reframe it as an overreaction or a mental health issue. It's a manipulation tactic designed to make you question your own perceptions and doubt what you know to be true. I didn't yell at her, I didn't argue with her, I didn't take the bait and engage in the kind of circular argument that she was probably hoping for. Instead, I just stated the facts calmly and clearly. "I found the receipts, the texts, the photos," I said. She hung up immediately. No screaming match, no tearful confession, no desperate attempts to explain or justify what she had been doing. She just disappeared from the conversation the same way she had been disappearing from our marriage for months, quietly, cowardly, and without any real explanation. That was the moment when it finally hit me. And it wasn't just about the cheating or even the elaborate web of lies she had been spinning for months. What really struck me was the complete and utter cowardice of it all. She couldn't even face what she had done. She couldn't give me 6 honest minutes after spending months systematically gutting everything we had built together over 7 years. I sat there in that rented cabin with the dogs curled up peacefully by the fireplace, and I actually laughed. It was a bitter, empty sound that echoed off the walls, but it was genuine. Because this whole time, I had been imagining some kind of dramatic showdown when the truth finally came out. I had pictured heated confrontations, tearful confessions, maybe even some kind of closure where we could at least acknowledge what had happened and why. But Vanessa didn't do closure. She didn't do honest conversations about difficult topics. What she did was escape routes, deflection tactics, and denial so persistent that it could bury whatever fragments of truth were left scattered around our relationship. The next morning, she started sending me paragraphs via text message. Long, carefully crafted walls of text that were clearly designed to overwhelm me with her version of events and make me feel like I was the one who was being unreasonable. "You're blowing this way out of proportion," read the first message. "It didn't mean anything. You weren't present in our relationship. You stopped making me feel wanted. I was just trying to figure myself out." I stared at that message for a long time, trying to process the mental gymnastics required to frame adultery as a form of personal development. According to her twisted logic, I should apparently feel bad for not helping her cheat more effectively. She was treating her affair like it was some kind of therapeutic journey that I had failed to support adequately. She used the word mistake 8 times across 4 different text messages. Never choice, never betrayal, never decision. Just mistake, over and over again. Like her hand had accidentally slipped and she had somehow fallen into Blake's bed 15 times across 7 different cities purely by accident. At one point, she even had the audacity to write, "Maybe if you had been more spontaneous, we wouldn't be here." That was it. That was the final click. The moment when whatever remained of the mask completely fell off and I could see exactly who I had been married to all along. She was actually trying to blame me for her affair, suggesting that my supposed lack of spontaneity had somehow forced her into the arms of another man. It was victim blaming disguised as relationship analysis, and it was so breathtakingly manipulative that it almost left me speechless. I didn't reply to any of her messages. Instead, I opened a new email and sent a message to our realtor, telling her that we would be listing the house for sale as soon as possible. The house was legally under my name. We had bought it with my inheritance money, though Vanessa had spent the last 3 years redecorating it like it was her personal Pinterest board brought to life. By noon that same day, I had systematically locked her out of every joint account we shared. Every streaming service, every subscription, even our shared Spotify account. I pictured her sitting there in our empty house, trying to play her ridiculous coffee shop chill playlist to calm her nerves, only to see Logan Failed pop up on her screen. This wasn't about revenge, though I'm sure that's how she interpreted it. This was about establishing boundaries for the first time in years. This was about making her feel the absence she had created in our relationship, the same absence I had been living with for months while she was off playing house with Blake in hotel rooms across the country. She called again that night, but I didn't pick up. She sent a voice memo instead. I could see it sitting there in my messages, probably full of tears and explanations and promises to change. Her voice was probably shaking in that recording, but I couldn't tell if it would be from anger, fear, or just the dawning realization that for the first time in our entire relationship, her performance wasn't getting her the applause she expected. I didn't play that voice memo. I let her listen to herself instead, because this wasn't her story anymore. It was mine. And I wasn't giving her a single line in the script I was writing for my future. The first message from Blake came that same night while I was outside behind the cabin, chopping wood to clear my head. The cold air was sharp in my lungs, my gloves were stiff from the freezing temperature, and I was finding some therapeutic value in the repetitive motion of splitting logs when my phone buzzed in my back pocket. When I pulled it out, I saw a number I didn't recognize with a Chicago area code. The message was brief and presumptuous. "We should probably talk, Blake." I stared at that message for a full minute, not out of shock, but out of pure disgust. It was like finding a cockroach inside your favorite tea mug. He didn't even bother introducing himself properly or explaining how he had gotten my number. He just assumed I would know exactly who he was and that I would be interested in having some kind of conversation with him. The casual arrogance of it was almost breathtaking. I wiped my hands clean, walked back inside the cabin, and set the phone down on the table. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I sat on the floor between Max and Luna, leaning my head back against the edge of the couch, listening to my heart thudding in that low, dull rhythm that comes after days of not sleeping properly and processing too much emotional trauma at once. I let the silence drag on, let it thicken in the air around me. Later that night, curiosity finally got the better of me. I opened his message again, let my finger hover over the reply button for a moment, and then tapped out 4 simple words. "Sure, say it all." He answered almost instantly, like he had been sitting there waiting for my response. "Look, man, I didn't know at first," he wrote. "She told me she was married, but that you guys were separated. She made it sound like it was over." I wanted to throw my phone directly into the fireplace. Not because of anything he had said, but because I knew exactly how Vanessa had framed our marriage to him. She had probably sold him some elaborate sob story, with just enough truth mixed in to make the rest of her lies sound believable. That was her particular magic trick. She would bleed just enough real emotion to earn sympathy, then lie just enough to keep herself safe from any real consequences. I typed back, 15 hotels, 7 cities. While I was walking our dogs planning our 8th anniversary trip. He read the message immediately. No reply came for 6 long minutes. Then finally, "I didn't know it went on that long. I'm sorry, she's been lying to both of us, I guess." That last sentence almost made me laugh out loud. Both of us. Like we were somehow on the same side of this situation. Like we were some kind of tragic duo that Vanessa had fooled with equal cruelty. But the reality was completely different. He had gotten hotel beds and intimate conversations and whatever fantasy version of Vanessa she presented when she was away from her real life. I had gotten years of lies wrapped in, "I love you," broken vows that were violated one quiet betrayal at a time, and the slow erosion of my ability to trust my own perceptions. So I wrote back, "I don't want your apology, I want distance." He didn't write again after that, and I was grateful for the silence. I had no interest in bonding with him over our shared experience of being deceived by the same woman. Whatever guilt he was feeling about his role in destroying my marriage was his problem to work through, not mine to help him resolve. 3 days later, Vanessa showed up at my parents' house. Not at the cabin where I was staying. She hadn't figured out where I had gone yet. But somehow, she had decided that my parents' driveway was an appropriate place to stage whatever dramatic scene she had been planning. My mother called me just after lunch, her voice low and hesitant in that way that told me immediately something was wrong. "She's in the driveway, Tyler," she said simply. I closed my eyes and felt my shoulders tense. What does she want? "She says she needs to speak to you face to face." Of course she did. Vanessa never let anything end unless she was the one controlling how it ended, even when she was the primary reason it had collapsed in the first place. She thought she deserved closure, as if I somehow owed her that opportunity after the wildfire she had set to our entire relationship. I told my mom to tell her to leave, but Vanessa didn't listen. Instead, she waited outside in her car for 3 full hours. I watched the entire thing unfold through my mom's Ring doorbell camera, feeling a mixture of fascination and disgust at her persistence. She just sat there in her driver's seat, not crying, not pacing around the driveway, not making any kind of scene, just sitting perfectly still in that same black jacket she had been wearing earlier in the week, like she hadn't even bothered to change her costume since the last act of this drama. Then, she rang the doorbell again. This time, my dad answered, and I watched through the camera as he opened the door, stared at her for a long moment without saying a single word, and then simply closed it again. It was a clean goodbye with no permission granted and no scene created. My father had always been a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes about what he thought of her showing up uninvited to harass his son. Later that night, she sent me an email with the subject line, "You won." I stared at that subject line for a moment, trying to process the mindset of someone who could frame the end of a marriage as some kind of competition with winners and losers. The email read, "You made your point. I hope you're happy with the silence. I guess it was always going to end like this. Just know I did love you even if I was stupid. I hope you find peace or whatever it is you're looking for." I didn't reply to that email. Instead, I archived it immediately, filing it away with all the other digital remnants of a relationship that had died months before I finally had the courage to bury it. Because it wasn't peace I was looking for, not really. What I was searching for was the part of myself that I had left behind years ago when I started accepting less than I deserved. I was trying to find the version of myself that existed before I began accepting her coldness as just a temporary phase. Before I stopped asking questions that might lead to uncomfortable answers. Before I convinced myself that her emotional distance was somehow my fault, and that if I just tried harder or loved her better, she would eventually return to being the person I thought I had married. I realized something important sitting there in the dark cabin that night, with only the sound of the wind outside my windows for company. She hadn't just cheated on me. What she had actually done was hollow me out completely and then wear my trust like it was a second skin that belonged to her. But she didn't get to wear it anymore, and she sure as hell didn't get to speak the last words in this story. It's strange how grief can sometimes feel like focus. That morning I woke up before the sun had even started to rise, and I could see that the lake outside the cabin was still frozen solid in the middle, but beginning to thaw around the edges. There was a kind of stillness in the air that made you believe time might actually stop completely if you just let it happen. The dogs were still curled up at my feet, breathing softly and peacefully, completely unaware that my entire world had tilted into something completely unrecognizable from what it had been just a week earlier. I sat at the small wooden table with a cup of bitter instant tea, staring down at my hands, and I realized something profound. I didn't feel broken anymore, not in the way I had expected to feel. Instead, I felt awake for the first time in years. Vanessa had taken so much from me, but it wasn't just the obvious things like memories and shared experiences. She had taken the small, daily rituals that make a life feel lived in and meaningful. Making pancakes together on Sunday mornings, arguing over where to hang picture frames when we redecorated rooms, fighting about money and bills just to end up watching terrible TV shows under one shared blanket on the couch. She hadn't destroyed my ability to trust all at once in some dramatic explosion. Instead, she had dismantled it methodically, one story at a time, one lie at a time, until I was standing in the middle of a life that looked familiar from the outside, but felt completely fake and hollow on the inside. That was the day I started writing everything down. Not for her, not for Blake, not for any kind of future confrontation or legal proceeding. I was writing for myself, for my own sanity and clarity. I pulled out my laptop and started creating a comprehensive catalog of every detail I had uncovered. I organized receipts, screenshots of messages, saved voice notes, and created a complete timeline of the affair. Everything I had ignored, excused, or swallowed during the months when I knew something was wrong, but couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. I gave every piece of evidence its own folder on my computer, and I named each folder after the specific lies she had told to cover her tracks. Jen from design, workshops, just friends, you're imagining it. Each folder contained the proof that contradicted whatever story she had been spinning at the time. It wasn't about revenge, and I didn't have any plans to use this evidence against her in some public way. But documenting the truth had a kind of power that I hadn't expected. It gave my rage structure and organization. It transformed the chaos of betrayal into something with clear outlines and boundaries. Around noon, my phone buzzed again with a blocked number. I let it go straight to voicemail without even considering answering it. 12 minutes later, another message appeared, this time through WhatsApp because I had blocked her regular number on my main phone line. "So this is how it ends after everything," she wrote. There it was again. the narcissism rebranded as heartbreak, the way she could make herself the victim of any situation, no matter how clearly she was the one who had caused the damage. I ignored that message completely, but the next one that followed made my blood pressure spike. "You're acting like I cheated on you for years. It was a few months. I didn't mean to fall for someone else. It just happened." That phrase, "it just happened," nearly made me throw my phone against the cabin wall. Like the hotels had booked themselves automatically. Like the lies had typed themselves into her text messages. Like Blake had somehow crawled into her bed without her ever consciously deciding to open the door and let him in. But the message that came after that was the real dagger, the one that finally revealed exactly what she thought of me and our entire relationship. "You were boring, Tyler. I'm sorry, but you made life small, predictable. I needed something else, something bigger." I sat with that message for a very long time. Here, finally, was the quiet contempt that had been hiding beneath the surface, showing its face at last. This wasn't guilt talking. This wasn't regret or shame about what she had done. This was someone who had completely rewritten the narrative in her own head to make herself the victim of my supposed inadequacy. She didn't cheat because she was broken or confused or going through some kind of personal crisis. She cheated because she wanted more excitement, more drama, more intensity than what our stable, committed relationship could provide. And she didn't care what she had to shatter to get it. In her mind, I wasn't the faithful husband who had been walking the dogs and holding down the mortgage and planning anniversary trips. I was just the boring anchor she needed to cut loose so she could sail toward whatever bigger thing she thought she deserved. So I wrote one last thing that day, but not to her and not to Blake. I wrote it to myself, opening a new document on my laptop and typing out a realization that felt like the most honest thing I had written in years. She did not love you quietly. She performed it until it got in her way. That was the exact moment I decided I wouldn't just leave her behind. I would erase her influence from my life completely. Not out of vengeance or spite, but out of pure necessity for my own survival and growth. I wouldn't be the man defined by what had been taken from him. Instead, I would become the man who rebuilt his life from the ground up, and this time, I would build it without her shadow lurking in the foundation. The first time I said the words out loud, they didn't even feel real. I'm getting divorced. It was at the county clerk's office, and the woman behind the glass partition didn't even blink when I said it. She just slid a clipboard over to me and asked to see my identification, like I was canceling a magazine subscription or updating my voter registration. The whole process felt surprisingly simple, clean, and bureaucratic. But as I held the pen over the form, something fundamental shifted inside me. The words stared back at me from the official paperwork. Petitioner, Tyler Henderson. Respondent, Vanessa Henderson. It felt like carving something permanent into stone, like watching a tombstone etch itself while the body was still warm and breathing. But I signed those papers anyway. And when I walked out into the cold February air, I felt like a free man for the first time in years. Not happy exactly, not healed, but honest with myself for the first time in a very long time. Vanessa didn't take the divorce filing well, though she handled it exactly the way I had expected her to. She didn't scream, she didn't beg, she didn't even pretend to be shocked by the legal papers. Instead, she sent me one text message when she received the official notice. "So that's it. You won't even talk to me in person before doing this." Notice what was missing from that message. No apology, no acknowledgement of what she had done to cause this situation. No recognition that her actions had consequences. Just a complaint about the method I had chosen for ending our marriage, not the reasons that had made it necessary. That's the thing with people like Vanessa. They care infinitely more about how the story gets told than what actually happened in real life. She wasn't mourning the loss of our marriage. She was furious that she couldn't control the narrative of how it ended. The next few days were quieter than I had expected, but I knew that kind of silence from her meant one thing. She was busy spinning the story to anyone who would listen. Sure enough, I started getting messages from people in our social circle who had only heard her version of events. The first one came from her sister, who I had always gotten along with well during family gatherings. "Hey, I'm not taking sides, but Vanessa's really upset," she wrote. "She said you just vanished without trying to fix things, that you've been cold for months." There it was, the reframing campaign in full swing. In Vanessa's version of events, I was the one who had given up. I was the one who had checked out emotionally. She had probably painted herself as the neglected wife, who had somehow stumbled into the arms of someone who just happened to see her value when her own husband had stopped trying. That word, accidentally was probably getting a lot of use in her conversations, like infidelity was something that just falls out of the sky and lands on unsuspecting married women. I wanted to scream at the injustice of it, but I didn't. Instead, I wrote back calmly. Check her texts, start with Blake, then we'll talk. Her sister never replied to that message, and I never heard from her again. By Friday of that week, I had successfully moved the rest of my belongings into the cottage by the lake. It wasn't a big place, just 2 bedrooms with creaky floors, a kitchen that permanently smelled like old pine wood and tea grounds, and walls that had clearly seen decades of different tenants come and go. But it was mine in a way that our old house had never really felt like mine, especially during those final months when I was walking on eggshells and second-guessing every interaction. The cottage had a wood-burning stove that filled the main room with warmth, a small dock out back that extended into the lake, and most importantly, the kind of deep silence that you could sit inside without feeling like you were going mad from the emptiness. I slept with Max and Luna curled up next to me on the bed, listening to the old heater humming low in the background, and for the first time in months, I wasn't lying awake wondering where my wife really was or whether she was telling me the truth about anything. That weekend, I did something that felt revolutionary at the time. I relaxed. Actually, genuinely relaxed without any underlying anxiety or suspicion eating away at my peace of mind. I wasn't checking her location on my phone every few hours. I wasn't wondering if she was lying about where she said she was going. I wasn't waiting up until 1 a.m. for someone who texted, "I'm just having a drink with the team," and then didn't come home until 4 a.m. with no real explanation for the missing hours. Instead, I read actual books cover to cover. I cooked meals for myself without having to worry about whether they would meet someone else's constantly changing dietary preferences. I even found myself genuinely smiling once, truly smiling from a place of contentment rather than obligation, while watching Max chase Luna through a pile of dry leaves behind the cottage. In those quiet moments, I started remembering who I used to be before the guilt and self-doubt had taken over my entire personality, before the constant second-guessing of my own perceptions, before every argument somehow ended with me apologizing just to keep the peace. Even when I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, I remembered the version of myself that wasn't always waiting to be chosen again, that didn't treat every day like an audition for someone else's approval. Then one night, I received a message from an unknown number, but this time it wasn't Blake trying to ease his conscience. It was from Jessica, one of Vanessa's former co-workers from a marketing agency she had briefly worked for a few years back. We had met at several office parties and holiday gatherings, and she had always struck me as someone who was direct and honest, the type of person who watched more than she talked and noticed things that other people missed. "Hey, I don't want to stir anything up," Jessica wrote, "but you should know Vanessa's been telling people you were emotionally abusive, that you manipulated her into staying when she wanted to leave. I don't know what's true, but I thought you deserved a heads up." My blood ran completely cold when I read that message. Not because I was surprised by Vanessa's tactics. By that point, nothing she did could really shock me anymore. What made my blood cold was the realization that I wasn't surprised at all. This was exactly the kind of move I should have expected from her. This was Vanessa's final gambit, her last desperate attempt to control the narrative. She couldn't just erase me from her life and move on quietly. She had to rewrite me into a villain to justify everything she had done. She couldn't accept that I had left her because I had finally seen her clearly for who she really was. In her mind, she had to become the victim again, because that was the only role that had ever given her any real power in our relationship. That's when I made a decision that felt both liberating and final. I wasn't just divorcing her legally. I was cutting the entire story loose. I was done explaining myself, done defending my actions, done carrying the weight of someone else's shame and guilt. If she wanted to rot in the narrative she had built for herself, she was welcome to do it. I had already escaped from that prison, and I wasn't going back into the fire just to prove that I hadn't been the one to start it. I didn't respond to Jessica's warning message, not because I didn't appreciate her giving me the heads up. I genuinely did. But her message confirmed something I had already come to understand about this entire situation. Vanessa wasn't trying to repair anything or make amends for what she had done. She was simply trying to survive the fallout from her own choices, and if survival meant turning me into the storm that had destroyed our marriage, she would do it without blinking an eye. Fine. Let her create whatever version of events helped her sleep at night. I wasn't going back into that fire to prove that I hadn't been the one to start it. I had already walked away from the flames, and I wasn't about to return just to argue about who had been holding the matches. That Monday, I found myself sitting in the county clerk's office again, this time to finalize the separation of assets paperwork. It was snowing outside, thick flakes coating my windshield and making the whole world look clean and new. I could see other couples coming in and out of the building, some there for marriage licenses with nervous excitement in their eyes, others there for divorce proceedings with grim determination on their faces. It struck me how absurdly thin the wall is between those two life-changing moments. One pen stroke to start everything, binding two lives together with promises and hope. One more pen stroke to end it all, dissolving years of shared history into a stack of legal documents. When my number was called, I stood up and handed over the paperwork like I was returning receipts for something I regretted buying. The clerk didn't even look up at me. She just stamped the file with a dull thump and said, "You're all set, all set." That's what freedom sounds like in a beige government building. One mechanical thump of a rubber stamp on official papers. 3 days later, Vanessa sent me another email. The subject line was completely blank this time, like she had run out of dramatic titles for her attempts at communication. The body of the message was shorter than her previous efforts. "You've made your point. You've humiliated me. Are you happy now?" I stared at that email for a while, trying to remember the last time Vanessa had actually asked me how I felt about anything. Really felt, not as part of some guilt-laced chess move or manipulation tactic, but out of genuine curiosity about my emotional state. I couldn't recall a single instance, which told me everything I needed to know about how our marriage had actually functioned. The word humiliation stood out to me. She thought this entire process was about embarrassing her publicly or making her look bad to our friends and family. She still didn't understand that this had nothing to do with her reputation and everything to do with my own sanity and self-respect. But that misunderstanding revealed something important. Her guilt was finally starting to talk. In the vacuum of attention I had left behind, she was beginning to hear her own echo for the first time in years. I didn't reply to that email, and I had no intention of ever replying to another one. She had made me invisible for months while she built an entire secret life behind my back. Now it was her turn to live in the silence and uncertainty she had created. The phone calls started the next week. Blocked numbers calling at random times throughout the day and night. No voicemails left, just that soft buzzing in the dark like a mosquito in your bedroom, designed to keep you half awake and doubting your own peace of mind. I let every single call go unanswered without exception. I didn't block the numbers because I wanted her to know that the line was open and available. I just didn't owe her my voice anymore. What I did do was open a new email draft to my lawyer, asking her to push the divorce proceedings through as quickly as possible with no delays, no mediation sessions, and no conversations beyond what the law absolutely required. I attached the signed separation agreement and told her to file everything immediately. 3 hours later, I received a one-line reply from my attorney. "I'll make it happen. You're almost there. Almost." It's strange how a single word can hold so much weight and promise. That weekend, I got a text message from an unknown number, but this time it wasn't Vanessa, Blake, or anyone trying to manipulate the situation for their own purposes. It was from Caleb, my oldest friend and the best man at our wedding. We hadn't spoken in months, not because we had fought or had any kind of falling out, but because I had gradually withdrawn from most of my friendships during the final stages of my marriage. It's something that happens to men when they're drowning, but don't want to make a scene about it. You start declining invitations, making excuses for why you can't hang out, and slowly isolating yourself because you don't want to admit that your life is falling apart. You tell yourself you're protecting your friends from your problems, but really you're just too ashamed to acknowledge how bad things have gotten. Caleb's message was characteristically simple and direct. "I just heard. If you need anything, beer, firewood, someone to say she's the worst out loud for you, I'm here." I stared at that message for a full minute, feeling something loosen in my chest that I hadn't even realized had been tight. Then I typed back the words I'd been wanting to say to someone for months. "She's the worst." He wrote back immediately, "Damn right." That exchange prompted the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. Not the bitter, dry kind of laugh that had become my default response to absurd situations, but a deep, genuine laugh that came from somewhere in my chest. It reminded me that I wasn't actually alone in this situation, despite how isolated I had felt during the worst parts of discovering Vanessa's betrayal. She had taken years from me, yes. She had stolen my trust, my peace of mind, and my ability to feel secure in my own home. But she hadn't taken me, the essential core of who I was underneath all the damage she had inflicted. She couldn't take that. Not anymore, because I was already in the process of rebuilding myself brick by brick, and she wasn't included anywhere in the blueprint for my future. A few days later, something unexpected happened that I definitely hadn't been prepared for. I received an actual letter in the mail, real paper, real ink, the kind of thing people write when they've run out of digital performances, and desperate Hail Mary attempts to regain control of a situation that has moved completely beyond their influence. There was no return address on the envelope, just my name written in Vanessa's distinctive handwriting. Her script was sharp and slanted, like she was still trying to make even her penmanship look prettier and more elegant than it actually was. I almost threw the entire thing in the trash without opening it, but curiosity has claws that are hard to ignore. I opened it to find 5 pages of handwritten text, the kind of thing people produce when they've run out of performance opportunities and the audience has already left the theater. The first line read, "I know you'll probably burn this before finishing it, but I'm asking you not to." I kept reading despite every instinct telling me to stop. "I didn't fall out of love with you," she wrote. "I just forgot how to be honest inside a life that looked good on paper. You were safe, steady. I never feared losing you, and maybe that made me take you for granted. I never meant for Blake to become anything. It started as escape, but then I started feeling like myself again." There it was, the justification disguised as introspection, her entire worldview still perfectly intact despite everything that had happened. In her version of events, nothing was really her fault. She didn't choose to betray me. She just somehow drifted into it like emotional gravity had pulled her away from our marriage without any conscious decision-making on her part. The letter continued with no mention of the elaborate lies she had told. No acknowledgement of the way she had looked me in the eye while planning hotel weekends with another man. No recognition of the systematic deception that had characterized the final months of our relationship. Just soft regret, carefully curated shame, and 1,000 different ways to say, "I didn't mean to hurt you," without ever admitting, "I knew I was hurting you, and I chose to do it anyway." But the part that hit me hardest was near the end. "I still love you, Tyler. In some strange, broken way, I always will. And if there's ever a version of us in the future that makes sense again, I hope you'd be open to that." That sentence didn't feel like love to me. It felt like possession, like someone marking their territory one last time because they were afraid to let go of something they had once owned and controlled. It was the words of someone who wanted to keep a door open indefinitely, just in case their new adventure didn't work out the way they had planned. I folded the letter back up when I finished reading it, but I didn't burn it like she had predicted I would. I didn't frame it either, or keep it somewhere special where I might reread it during moments of weakness. Instead, I shoved it into a drawer next to a receipt from the day I had moved out of our house. Both items felt like relics from a life I didn't need to carry with me anymore. Artifacts from a version of myself that had accepted far less than he deserved. The next day, I made a decision that surprised even me. I drove back to our old neighborhood, not to see her or attempt any kind of confrontation, but for my own sense of closure. I needed to visit the places where we had built our life together and see how they felt now that I knew the truth about what had been happening behind the scenes. I pulled into the parking lot of the grocery store where we used to shop together every weekend. This was the place where we had bickered over different brands of almond milk, debated the merits of various breakfast cereals, and made small decisions together that had felt like the foundation of a shared domestic life. I walked through those familiar aisles like I was retracing ghost steps, remembering her laughter, her criticism, and the way she used to hold my wrist instead of my hand when she was in a particularly bad mood. None of it hurt anymore in the sharp, immediate way it had just a few weeks earlier. Instead, it all felt hollow and distant, like memories from someone else's life that I could observe without being emotionally destroyed by them. I stood in front of the checkout lane where we had waited in line hundreds of times, staring at a display of chewing gum, and I remembered something she had said to me once. "You always pick the dumbest flavor," she had commented when I grabbed a pack of mint gum instead of the cinnamon variety she preferred. At the time, I had laughed it off as one of those small marital observations that couples make about each other's quirks and preferences. But standing there now, I realized it hadn't been a joke at all. It was part of a much larger pattern of constant small criticisms and corrections that had slowly eroded my confidence in my own judgment. The mocking comments when I spoke too long about something that interested me. The cold shoulder treatment when I forgot to compliment her outfit. The sighs of exasperation when I suggested activities that didn't align with her current mood or aesthetic preferences. Her love had come with rules that I never quite understood completely, and I had spent years in an endless audition, trying to earn something that should have been freely given. No more. I was done performing for an audience that would never be satisfied with anything I had to offer. That night, I made another decision that felt both symbolic and practical. I took the last boxes of our shared belongings, photo albums, picture frames, wedding souvenirs, and other mementos from our 7 years together, and loaded them into my car. I drove them to a storage unit across town and sealed everything up in a space I labeled simply, "Past, do not open." When I finished organizing everything and locked the storage unit door, I did something I hadn't done since long before I discovered Blake's existence. I stood outside under the stars in the biting cold winter air and breathed deeply, really deeply, filling my lungs completely with the sharp, clean air. It wasn't because I had everything figured out or because I had reached some perfect state of healing and closure. It was because for the first time in years, I didn't have to pretend I was okay while living inside something that was slowly killing me from the inside. I was alone. I was still in the process of healing, but I was genuinely free. And freedom, I discovered, doesn't come from forgiveness or confrontation or getting the last word in some dramatic final conversation. It doesn't come from revenge or from making the other person understand exactly how much they hurt you. Freedom comes from the moment you realize you don't need any of those things anymore. It comes from understanding that your peace doesn't depend on their acknowledgement of what they did wrong. It's surreal how quickly your definition of normal can shift when you remove yourself from a toxic situation. 4 weeks after I filed the final divorce papers, I started waking up in the morning without immediately checking my phone first thing. There were no missed calls to worry about, no guilt-laced text messages to decode, no half-hearted attempts at manipulation wrapped in fake concern about my well-being. Just silence. And silence, I had learned, was actually a gift rather than something to be afraid of. I started keeping a routine that felt sustainable and healthy. Early mornings with real tea instead of instant coffee, long walks with Max and Luna down the frost-bitten trails that wound through the woods behind the cottage. I chopped wood when I needed to work through difficult emotions. I cleaned the place from top to bottom when I needed to feel productive. And I read more books than I had managed to get through in the previous 6 years combined. I even started sketching again, something I hadn't done since college. I was terrible at it, completely out of practice. But the drawings were mine in a way that felt important. There was no drama in my daily life anymore. No tension humming beneath every conversation. No double meanings to decode or cold glances to interpret across the dinner table. I used to call that dynamic marriage, but now I realized it had actually been survival mode. But peace never stays completely quiet forever, especially when someone like Vanessa is still out there in the world, unable to accept that a story can end without her getting to deliver the closing monologue. The first crack in my newfound tranquility came through social media. I hadn't blocked her on any platforms, but I had muted everything related to her so I wouldn't accidentally see updates that might disturb my healing process. Still, curiosity is a hell of a thing, and one night I found myself checking her Instagram profile to see how she was handling the aftermath of our separation. She hadn't posted any new content since the day before I left, but her story was actively updated. There was a photo of a hotel room, an artfully arranged glass of wine, her legs stretched across crisp white sheets in that posed casual way that she had perfected over the years. The caption read, "Solo retreats are underrated. Self-care is everything." The camera angle and lighting told a different story than the words she had chosen. It was clearly the same hotel chain she had been staying at with Blake during their months-long affair. I didn't care about it in the way she was probably hoping I would. I wasn't devastated or jealous or desperate to know more details. But it was clear that she was performing again. Not for me, not even necessarily for Blake, but for herself. She was trying to script a version of our breakup where she emerged from the wreckage completely untouched, empowered, and successfully rebranded as someone who had simply outgrown a limiting relationship. It was damage control disguised as self-empowerment. A few days later, I received a phone call from Jeff, a mutual friend we hadn't spoken to since the initial fallout from our separation. He sounded nervous on the phone, like someone carrying news that he wasn't entirely sure I wanted to hear, but felt obligated to share anyway. "I ran into Vanessa at a gallery opening downtown," he said, his voice cautious and measured. "She's spinning the story pretty hard, man." I didn't ask him to clarify what he meant, but he continued anyway, apparently feeling like I needed to know what version of events was circulating through our old social circle. She's telling people you ghosted her completely, he explained. That you were always kind of cold and controlling in the relationship. That you left without even telling her why or giving her a chance to work things out. That part didn't surprise me at all. It was exactly the kind of revisionist history I had expected her to create. What did catch my attention was what came next. She's saying she tried to make the marriage work for months, but you just checked out emotionally. She's telling people Blake didn't mean anything, that he was a mistake she confessed to you immediately, and that you abandoned her anyway instead of trying to forgive her and move forward together. That was when something shifted deep inside me, and it wasn't pain or sadness or even disappointment. It was pure, focused anger. Because now it wasn't just about betrayal or infidelity or the end of our marriage. It was about revisionism, about rewriting history to suit her needs. She wasn't just moving on with her life. She was actively trying to erase the truth of what had actually happened between us. Jeff paused for a moment before continuing. I just thought you should know in case it circles back to you somehow. I thanked him for the heads up and I genuinely meant it. But I didn't feel threatened or panicked by what Vanessa was doing. Why? Because the truth doesn't shake or crumble when someone lies louder about it. The facts of what happened between us were solid, documented, and undeniable. And Vanessa's lies, as Jeff had pointed out, were getting louder and more desperate by the week. The next move she made crossed a line that I hadn't even anticipated. She tried to call my mother directly. My mother, a woman she hadn't spoken to since showing up uninvited in my parents' driveway, armed with crocodile tears and a throat full of excuses about misunderstandings and mistakes. I got the call from my mom about an hour after Vanessa had contacted her. My mother asked if we could meet for coffee later that day because she had something important to discuss with me. She wanted to explain things, my mom told me when we sat down together. Maybe fix things between you two, she said. I asked my mother what her response had been, and the answer made me proud to be her son. I told her, sweetheart, my son doesn't belong to you anymore. Don't call this number again. My mother's voice was calm but firm as she recounted the conversation. Then I hung up. I swear I nearly cried when she told me that. Not because of anything related to Vanessa, but because for the first time in a long time, someone had stood up for me without needing to be asked, without requiring an explanation of the situation, and without expecting me to justify my decisions to them. Later that week, I noticed that Blake had deactivated his social media accounts completely. I wasn't actively checking for him, but one of Vanessa's old tagged posts now showed a broken link where his username used to be. Something had gone sour between them, quietly and predictably, though I didn't need the specific details to understand what had probably happened. I could guess how their relationship had unraveled. Vanessa hadn't really wanted Blake as a long-term partner. She had wanted an exit strategy from our marriage. He had simply been the nearest available escape hatch when she decided she was done with the commitment and responsibility of being married. Once the initial excitement faded and the real world started creeping back into their fantasy, she probably saw him for what he actually was. Not a romantic ideal, just an ordinary man. Vanessa had never loved mirrors unless they reflected the exact version of herself that she wanted to see at any given moment. When Blake stopped serving that purpose, when he became a reminder of the chaos and destruction she had caused rather than a symbol of her liberation and self-discovery, their affair would have lost its appeal very quickly. I leaned back in my chair that evening, watching through the window as the lake continued its slow process of freezing solid, and I smiled for the first time in weeks. Not from spite or a desire for revenge, not because I was happy that their relationship had failed, but because I realized something profound. I wasn't angry anymore. For the first time since Vanessa had detonated our entire life together, I wasn't waiting for closure from her. I wasn't thirsting for karma to catch up with her actions. I wasn't even afraid of what people in our old social circle might believe about me based on her version of events. I knew the truth about what had happened between us, and that knowledge was finally enough for me. I didn't need her to admit what she had done. I didn't need Blake to apologize for his role in destroying my marriage. I didn't need our mutual friends to see through her lies and validate my experience. I had reached a place where my peace of mind was no longer dependent on other people's understanding or approval of my choices. It happened on a Sunday morning when I was least expecting it. I was at the local farmer's market, something I had never done when I was with Vanessa because she always found it too rustic for her taste. She used to complain that the smell of dirt and handmade soap gave her migraines, and she preferred the sterile predictability of chain grocery stores where everything was packaged and branded according to her aesthetic preferences. But now I absolutely loved the farmer's market. There was something deeply satisfying about the clatter of wooden carts on uneven pavement, the steam rising off kettle corn stands, and the soft murmur of elderly couples bartering over preserves and fresh vegetables. It all felt real, unpolished, human, and alive in a way that I had forgotten was possible. I was standing at a vendor's table, picking through jars of local honey and reading handwritten labels describing different flavor profiles, when I heard someone say my name behind me, Tyler. I turned around, and there she was. Vanessa, standing about 10 feet away from me, looking like a completely different person than the woman I had been married to for 7 years. She wasn't wearing any makeup. There was no Instagram filter smoothing her features, and there was no carefully curated aesthetic presentation. Just a thick wool sweater, faded jeans, and hair pulled back into a tight, no-effort bun that didn't quite disguise the bags under her eyes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there like strangers wearing the clothes of old familiarity. Two people who had once shared a bed and a mortgage, but now felt like we belonged to completely different worlds. I nodded slightly in acknowledgement. Vanessa? She looked down at the jar of honey in her own hand, then back at me, and I could see her searching for the right words to navigate this unexpected encounter. I didn't think I'd see you here, she said quietly. I live here now, I replied, keeping my tone neutral and factual. That simple statement landed harder than I had expected it to. She blinked once, then twice, like she was processing information that didn't quite fit with whatever version of reality she had been carrying around in her head. So it's really over then? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel rage when I saw her face. I didn't feel pity or sadness or even disappointment. What I felt was distance, like I was watching someone I used to know from the other side of a thick glass wall that couldn't be crossed. It was over the moment you made it a two-person marriage with a third person, I said calmly. She winced slightly but didn't deny what I had said or try to argue with my characterization of what had happened between us. Instead, she sighed in that way that suggested she was tired of carrying around the weight of what she had done. I messed up, she said simply. No, I corrected her, my voice still calm but more firm. You chose to mess up over and over again. That's not a slip or an accident. That's a path you decided to walk down. There it was again. That tight, clenched jaw expression she always wore when she wasn't in complete control of a conversation. She hated silence because it exposed her, stripped away her ability to perform or manipulate the emotional temperature of an interaction. She looked away toward the edge of the market, watching other people go about their Sunday morning routines, before turning back to me with something that looked almost like vulnerability. He's gone, by the way, she said without any prompting from me. I said nothing, just continued to look at her with the same calm expression. She felt compelled to clarify what she meant. Blake, it didn't... I don't know, it stopped working. Or maybe it never really did work in the first place. I remained silent. And after a moment, she said the thing I had been expecting since the moment she had spotted me at the market. Do you think maybe one day we could talk? Really talk? I've changed, Tyler. I didn't smile, I didn't flinch, I didn't react emotionally at all. I just answered her with the calm certainty that I had earned through months of painful but necessary self-reflection. I don't want to go backward, I said clearly. I spent too many years begging for scraps that you dressed up as love. I'm not angry anymore, Vanessa, I just don't care. That response broke something in her, though not in the dramatic movie scene way that you might expect. It was just a flicker. Her eyes blinking rapidly, her lips tightening slightly to hide the tremor I could see threatening to appear. She nodded slowly, understanding that this was really the end of whatever story we had been telling together for the past 7 years. Okay then, she said quietly. She turned and walked away from me, disappearing into the crowd of Sunday morning shoppers like a story that had finally figured out how to end properly. And I stood there in the crisp morning air, holding a jar of honey, watching the woman I had once thought I would grow old with become just another face in a crowd of strangers. That night, I did something I had been putting off for weeks. I deleted every photo of Vanessa from my phone, not in a fit of rage or emotional pain, but in a state of complete peace with my decision. Every picture, every selfie we had taken together, every vacation snapshot where I was smiling at the camera while she was already emotionally gone and planning her next escape, all of it went into the digital trash. I went through years of saved memories methodically and without sentiment. Photos from our honeymoon where I looked genuinely happy, and she looked like she was already bored with the whole experience. Pictures from family gatherings where I was trying to include her in conversations while she checked her phone every few minutes. Images from date nights where I had convinced myself we were reconnecting, not realizing that she was mentally planning her next meeting with Blake. When I finished clearing out every trace of her from my digital life, I didn't pour myself a glass of whiskey or play sad music or engage in any kind of dramatic ceremony to mark the occasion. I just walked out onto the porch of the cottage, looked up at the clear winter sky full of stars, and whispered something that surprised even me. Thank you. Not thank you for the love we had shared, because I was no longer sure how much of that had been real versus performance. Not thank you for the good times, because they had all been poisoned by the knowledge of what she had been doing behind my back. But thank you for leaving, for finally showing me who she really was, and for giving me back something I never thought I would feel again: myself. The divorce finalized on a cold Tuesday morning in late February. There was no courtroom drama, no final confrontation scene, no last-minute attempts at reconciliation. Just a few scanned signatures on legal documents and a confirmation email from my lawyer that read simply, "It's done. Take care of yourself." I sat with that message for a while, reading it over and over again like I was trying to absorb the full weight of what those two words meant. It's done. Two simple words that carried the entire weight of 8 years, 7 years of marriage, plus the year we had spent engaged in planning what we thought would be our future together. There was no confetti, no deep breath of relief, no moment of triumph or vindication. Just a quiet settling of something heavy that I had been carrying for far too long, finally being laid down for good. I didn't feel victorious or even particularly happy. What I felt was still, profoundly, peacefully still. And that stillness, that absence of tension and anxiety and constant vigilance, was worth everything I had gone through to get there. I spent the next few days cleaning the cottage from top to bottom, like I was preparing it for someone new to move in. Not a guest, not a romantic partner, but me. The version of myself that had existed before, I shrank down to fit inside someone else's narrow definition of love. The man I used to be before I became the version of Tyler, who waited up at night for text messages that would never come, who bought flowers to apologize for things he hadn't done, and who carried the blame for another person's chronic boredom and dissatisfaction. I hung new curtains that I had chosen myself. I burned the last of the letters and cards she had given me over the years, watching them turn to ash in the fireplace. I donated old clothes that carried too many memories of the man I used to be when I was trying to earn someone else's approval. I rearranged all the furniture just to prove to myself that I was the one who got to decide where things belonged in my own space now. Every drawer, every shelf, every small decision about how to organize my living space, all of it was mine to control. That's what real healing looks like, I realized. Not fireworks or dramatic revelations or perfect moments of closure. Just quiet, deliberate ownership over your own life, one small choice at a time. Weeks passed, and I started reconnecting with old friends who I had gradually lost touch with during the final years of my marriage. I met Caleb for beers by the lake, and we talked and laughed like men who had both been lost in their own ways and found again. We shared stories about stupid memories from our younger days, and talked honestly about what it felt like to rebuild your life when everything you thought you knew about yourself turned out to be based on someone else's lies. I even met someone new at a bookstore one afternoon. Her name is Sarah, and she recommended a novel to me completely by accident, while we were both reaching for the same copy on a high shelf. But this isn't a love story, at least not yet. And maybe it never will be. Because for the first time in my adult life, I'm not rushing towards something new, just to outrun the silence and emptiness of being alone with myself. I sit in that silence now, and I let it speak to me. And what it's been telling me, consistently and clearly, is simple. I am enough. Without the ring, without the roles and responsibilities of marriage, without the shared history that I thought defined who I was supposed to be. I am enough exactly as I am, and I don't need anyone else's validation or approval to make that true. Vanessa will always be a chapter in my story, but she's not the whole book, and she's definitely not the ending. She taught me what love isn't, what it shouldn't cost, and how it should never have to be earned through betrayal or begged for in arguments or traded away for temporary affection and validation. As much as she tried to burn down the foundation of my entire life, she didn't destroy me in the process. What she actually did was reveal me. She forced me to look honestly at the weak beams and cracks in the walls, the places where I had compromised my own dignity and self-respect just to keep her comfortable and prevent her from looking elsewhere for excitement. When the house finally fell, when she lit the match and then tried to call it an accident, I didn't die inside the burning wreckage. I walked out into the fresh air and started over. So here I am, writing this from the same place where I first found my peace after everything fell apart. The lake is still frozen solid outside my window. Max and Luna are sleeping peacefully at my feet, and the fire in the wood-burning stove is burning low and steady. If I could give anyone reading this story a single piece of advice, anyone thought that might help someone else who's going through something similar, it would be this. Don't wait around to be chosen by someone who treats your love like it's conditional. Don't stay trapped in a place where love feels like a constant test that you're always on the verge of failing. Don't accept a relationship where your basic needs are treated like burdens, where your loyalty becomes a leash around your own neck, or where you're expected to bleed quietly just so someone else can feel powerful and in control. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving the other person wrong or making them understand exactly how much they hurt you. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remove yourself so completely and thoroughly from their orbit that they never get the chance to reach you again, never get to hurt you again, never get to make you doubt your own worth again. That's exactly what I did. I didn't waste energy trying to expose Vanessa's lies to our mutual friends. I didn't attempt to destroy her reputation or make her pay publicly for what she had done to our marriage. I simply removed myself from her world so completely that she became irrelevant to my happiness and peace of mind. And now I sleep easily every single night. No guilt keeping me awake, no lies to untangle, no ghosts from the past haunting my present. I've built a life where I don't have to perform for anyone's approval, where I don't have to walk on eggshells to avoid someone else's unpredictable moods, and where I can trust my own perceptions without constantly second-guessing myself. I'm not saying the healing process was easy or quick. There were plenty of nights when I questioned whether I had made the right choice, whether I had given up too easily, whether I should have fought harder to save what we had built together. But every time I started to doubt myself, I would remember that phone call with Blake's voice in the background, or the hotel receipts, or the way she had looked me in the eye while planning her next betrayal. The truth is, you can't save a relationship when only one person is actually participating in it. You can't rebuild trust with someone who sees honesty as optional. And you can't love someone back to faithfulness when they've already decided that their happiness matters more than your pain. What I've learned is that sometimes walking away isn't giving up. It's finally choosing yourself after years of choosing someone who never chose you back. It's recognizing that your peace of mind is worth more than someone else's comfort. It's understanding that you deserve to be with someone who sees your love as a gift, not a burden to be managed or a resource to be exploited. I don't know what the future holds for me. I don't know if Sarah from the bookstore will become something meaningful, or if I'll meet someone else entirely, or if I'll be perfectly content being single for the foreseeable future. What I do know is that I'm no longer afraid of any of those possibilities because I've learned how to be complete on my own. That's the real victory here. Not that Vanessa's affair with Blake eventually fell apart, not that her lies eventually caught up with her, not that karma somehow balanced the scales. The real victory is that I rediscovered who I was underneath all the damage she had inflicted, and I chose to rebuild my life around that person instead of around the ghost of what we used to be together. I am Tyler Henderson. I am 29 years old, and I am finally living a life that belongs entirely to me. No performances required, no auditions necessary, no one else's approval needed. Just me, the dogs, this cottage by the lake, and the kind of peace that can only come from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to settle for anything less than you deserve. That's how this story really begins. Not with betrayal, not with heartbreak, but with the quiet courage it takes to choose yourself when no one else will.